In today's video, we're going to discuss the possibility of a big trade between the Montreal Canadiens and the St. Louis Blues. We'll discuss the parameters of the deal, see if it makes sense, and of course want lots of viewer feedback. We also have some news around the NHL, including a few players signing professional tryout agreements for training camp, and longtime NHL goalie Jonathan Bernier has announced his retirement. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news to take a look at, and of course, a potential trade I want to take a look at between Montreal and St. Louis. Now, with the big news today, of course, was longtime NHL goalie Jonathan Bernier has announced his retirement from the game of hockey. Jonathan Bernier was around the game a long time, ended up appearing in 404 NHL games. Of course, he was drafted pretty highly, 11th overall in 2006, played in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, actually played for a team in the Q, which was based out of Maine, which was pretty rare. There haven't been too many teams over the years based out of Maine or the U.S. to participate in that league, but Lewiston, Maine had the team at the time where he completed his full junior career, had solid run there, real good numbers, which is why he was able to be drafted so highly. The team even, I believe, won a Quebec League championship, went to the Memorial Cup one of those years as well. Ended up, of course, getting drafted by Los Angeles, where he put in some time preparing himself in the minors, and then, of course, not long after, had a chance to be a backup goalie. The problem with Bernier not getting more of an opportunity in LA was he came up at the same time as Jonathan Quick. Quick and Bernier were coming out to the league around the same time. Quick was just a little bit ahead of him and got the opportunity and just kind of ran with it. And for 3 or 4 years there, Bernier was Quick's understudy or his backup, but ultimately Jonathan Quick was so solid and of course had so much success that Bernier became expendable, and of course ended up being involved in a pretty significant trade between Los Angeles and Toronto, which we've seen a few of those over the years. But Bernier, of course, was dealt to the Leafs, where he played for a good amount of time, certainly had his ups and downs, certainly had his moments. So he had some good games there, some good seasons, but he also had some unfortunate bad bounces, I guess we could say. I know Leaf fans will know what I'm talking about. A couple of goals that went in, I believe, from center ice. Certainly had not a great finishing to his career there. Ended up in Anaheim, Colorado, Detroit, New Jersey. Still had decent play after he left Toronto, was able to bounce back. But once he left there, he was really never considered a starting goaltender from that point forward, but certainly had himself a pretty decent career. Like I said, a very highly touted, highly ranked prospect in the Kings system. Came up at the same time as Jonathan Quick. If Quick hadn't have been there or hadn't worked out the way he did, I wonder if things would have been different for Bernier. Being drafted so highly, I'm sure they envisioned him being the starting goaltender at some point, but goaltending can be finicky, and sometimes you don't know how things are going to work out development-wise, but had a pretty good career. Want to wish him the best in whatever comes next for him. Certainly a pretty good run there in the NHL. And we also got news today on another prospect signing their entry-level contract, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers first-rounder from the 2023 draft, Oliver Bonk, who, of course, defenseman and son of former NHLer Radek Bonk, who had a long career mostly playing for the Ottawa Senators. Of course, Bonk, plays for the London Knights in the Ontario Hockey League, signed his 3-year entry-level contract. So certainly a pretty interesting prospect there. Bonk is another prime example of perseverance. I believe it wasn't more than a year or two ago he was playing Junior B, and then all of a sudden he's playing in Major Junior, getting drafted in the first round. So hard work and trusting the process can certainly pay off and help you achieve your dreams if you stick with it for sure. A couple of PTOs were also announced today. The Boston Bruins today announced that they've signed forward Alex Chiasson to a PTO. Chiasson's bounced around a fair bit. Last year, he only came on and finished the season out in Detroit, but didn't have a contract at the beginning of the season. I know at one point, Chiasson was looked upon as being a pretty highly touted winger. He was drafted highly, started in Dallas, and he was the centerpiece going back to Ottawa in the Jason Spezza trade way back when, and went to Ottawa, didn't really last there too long, couple years, but never really fully reached the potential that they were hoping when they traded for him with the Calgary, and he's been to a number of teams since then, and we'll see if he can find him another season, extend his life in the NHL, and find a spot with Boston. Boston doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle room when it comes to salary cap, but I guess if he has a good enough showing, maybe they might prefer him over one of their depth options, or maybe he becomes a player, gets a two-way deal and has to go through waivers. Hard to say what happens, but Chiasson will go to Boston on a PTO. In the Carolina Hurricanes today also announced they've signed veteran defenseman Nathan Beaulieu also do a professional tryout to attend training camp. You might wonder why Carolina would do this. They do have a pretty deep blue line as it is. I really don't think that Beaulieu has a great chance at all to make the NHL roster out of camp. But you just never know sometimes. I mean, teams run into injuries unexpectedly through camp and preseason action or early in the NHL season on a regular basis. So I know at one point as well in the preseason, the Hurricanes actually have 2 preseason games on the same day, so they're going to end up with a split squad, so they're going to need at least 12 to 13 defensemen. Some of the regulars don't always play every preseason game, so they need to have a number of guys in camp who can take those spots and fill those minutes as well, so they have a chance to evaluate a number of different guys here. So could Beaulieu end up getting himself a contract? It's possible. At best, he gets a 2-way deal probably, and then has to go through waivers before he finds himself having a real shot. But injuries there could play a role. You just never know. And like I said, the other thing that sometimes happens in training camp is you get a guy there in the PTO, might be looking good, but numbers-wise, you look at it, it's hard to imagine where they're going to find a roster spot for him. Doesn't mean other teams aren't watching, though. Sometimes I've seen players go to camp with one team and end up getting picked up and signed by another. So you just never know. We'll see what happens with Beaulieu. At least he's got a spot to go to camp and try to earn himself a contract. Now, as I mentioned, I came across some information suggesting about a mock trade between Montreal and St. Louis that I found very interesting. Now, I want to caution you, this is not coming from a reputable source saying that this is actually being discussed. So this is not a rumor that's people feel is being talked about and could happen anything imminently at all. However, the Montreal media source that I was listening to actually had information on one of the players being linked to a different team, but they felt that rumor didn't make a lot of sense, and that this is something that would make a lot more sense. And if once you kind of hear the whole approach here, to me, it makes a lot of sense too. And I agree that this is something that these two teams should absolutely discuss. Now, if you take a look at how the thing started, it was about Josh Anderson kind of being the centerpiece. Now, we know Josh Anderson's a player in Montreal. I think the Habs like him. He's a good veteran guy. Seems to work well with the younger guys. But at the end of the day, he's making $5.5 million for 4 more seasons. He's typically no more than a 20-goal guy. Doesn't really do a lot of other things well. Like, he's not known for a strong defensive play. Like, he's pretty much a north-south guy, big body, not afraid to play physical, score some goals around the net. I think he's only ever hit over 25 goals, I think once. So that is a lot of money for what he brings. And he rarely plays a full season. He tends to get hurt a lot. So there's things to like and there's things to be concerned about. Now, having said that, there's certainly been a number of rumors in the past 6 to 8 months about teams that have inquired with Montreal to try to acquire Anderson's services. And for the most part, Kent Hughes and the Habs have been reluctant to pull the trigger. Now, it doesn't mean they won't do it at some point. They just haven't been approached with a deal that they really like and feels makes them better. So they also find themselves right now in a different situation where they have an extra goaltender in Casey DeSmith, who they picked up in that Jeff Petrie swap when it came to dealing with the Pittsburgh Penguins when the whole Erik Karlsson situation went down. So, of course, Ken Hughes kind of played third-party broker here. Instead of retaining money on Karlsson, he took some contracts from the Penguins to make things easier, including Jeff Petrie and, of course, including Casey DeSmith. Now, Petrie's already been flipped, and it's suspected that DeSmith will be as well. At least there's a good chance of that. We already have confirmation of Ken Hughes telling Casey DeSmith and acknowledging this publicly that he's asked him to be patient and let him know that there's a good possibility that he will be traded to another team. No guarantees, of course, but it's something that they're working on and very well could happen. So having said all that, you look around the league and you look at, well, what teams could use goaltending help, and then what teams might have interest in Josh Anderson, and they found themselves a pretty good looking deal here, I think. So here's how the trade would go based on the suggestion here from the Montreal media source. So it had Josh Anderson and Casey DeSmith being traded to the St. Louis Blues. In return, Montreal would get veteran defenseman Marco Scandella, veteran forward Kasperi Kapanen, a first-round pick, and a third-round pick. So now here's the the full breakdown. If you look at it, you get Anderson making 5.5, you get DeSmith making 1.8. That's a total of $7.3 million going out. Scandella makes 3.275. Kapanen makes 3.2. So that's 6.475 coming back in. The Habs shave off close to $1 million in cap. So they get some cap relief. They get a different type of forward in Kapanen, obviously not the same kind of guy as Anderson at all. And they get Scandella. Now, Scandella and Kapanen both only have 1-year contracts, so they would only play for the Habs. Maybe they get extended, but in Scandella's case, doubtful. Kapanen, perhaps. They're only guaranteed to play for the Habs for 1 year, but they can get like a short-term trial. Scandella played in Montreal before, so he knows what that's like there. Kapanen would be new to the team, never played there, but did play for the Leafs, of course, before. And they could use, obviously you can never have too many first-round picks. So clearly for Josh Anderson, they get a first-round pick, and for DeSmith, it kind of becomes a trade of the rest. And now, obviously, you get a couple of players and a third-round pick for DeSmith, which might seem like a lot. It may not be the exact full way the deal goes down, but those would be like your main pieces. Now, St. Louis, though, if you take a look at their needs, they could use help in goal. They have Jordan Binnington, they have Joel Hofer. Now, maybe they're comfortable going with Hofer. They don't really have a great number 3 option. A lot of teams are looking for a more experienced number 3 guy. So even if Hofer or DeSmith ends up being 2 or 3, however it works out, they still would have a 3 goalie system there that would be a lot more strong. Whereas there's teams like Montreal and a few others that have 4 goalies deep and need to move one. Right, so that certainly adds, to me, that's a lot more secure going with Binnington and DeSmith. Hofer still only has, I think, 7 or 8 NHL games to his experience right now, and over time, that's going to grow. Maybe he's the goalie of the future. Time will tell, but it kind of takes the pressure off and adds a little more depth in case one of those 2 guys also run into any injuries. So that, from that perspective, DeSmith makes sense in St. Louis. I think he does anyways. We know for a long time now that Doug Armstrong wants to make some changes to his blue line, but most of his blue liners have either a no move or a modified no trade. Trading Torrey Krug is going to, as much as he tried before, didn't work out. Moving Scandella seems to be a lot easier and would make more sense here that he might be the odd man out. So we know that they want to change up the blue line, move a guy out, and we know that they need goaltending help. So there's those connections in St. Louis. Does give this team, to me, it makes a lot of sense that they would make great trade partners. Now, of course, Josh Anderson could fit in that lineup. He could play either in your second or third line. Adds a little bit more size and grit to that Blues lineup. Like I said, they seem to like players that come in with term there. I mean, the way the Blues like to play and the way Craig Berube's style of play, I think Anderson would fit nicely there. Now, of course, like I said, they give up a few draft picks as well. So the Habs continue to get future assets for down the road to continue to build this rebuild. So the Kapanen and Scandella don't have to stick around, and that's how it goes. Now, to me, it's not a deal that's an absolute slam dunk, but to me, it makes a lot of sense. Now, this could end up being a smaller trade. Maybe it's a case of Casey DeSmith going to St. Louis without Anderson. I still think that the goalie and the team make a lot of sense. We know that they want to move a defenseman. Montreal could probably stand to use another veteran. They have a lot of young guys there in the back end. They did move out, obviously, a guy like Joel Edmondson as well. So another veteran that's on the move. So bringing in somebody else as a vet to have around wouldn't be a terrible idea. Obviously, have some good mentors for the younger defensemen coming up the ranks here. And Kapanen could be a pretty good, second, third line player for them. Who, obviously, once he got into St. Louis, he certainly seemed to find his game and played better. So we will see what happens. But those 2 teams, to me, do make a lot of sense. But what do you think, especially if you're a fan of either of these teams? Is this a deal that you would pull the trigger on? Is Josh Anderson eventually going to get moved? I think he will at some point. I don't think the Habs are in any rush to do it. But I think if they start talking to St. Louis and they want to do a deal involving around Casey DeSmith, I wouldn't be surprised to see Anderson's name come up. To me, he's just a kind of prototypical type of player that I think the Blues would want, and allows them to send a defenseman to Montreal to shake things up that way. So it solves a couple of needs on both sides. So again, let me know your thoughts. Again, just to clarify, this is not a rumor coming from an NHL reputable insider saying that they're discussing this. This is from Montreal media. They did have some rumors that they were told from sources that linked Anderson to other teams. It was actually Anderson being linked to the New Jersey Devils is what he was told, that there was some interest there, but didn't think that made a lot of sense with all the other deals the Devils have made this offseason, and I do concur with that. I think a team like St. Louis makes a lot more sense if there's going to be a trade, and I think DeSmith makes sense there as well. So again, this is just a mock trade proposal. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.